Welcome to the Paraprofessional Module, Prevention of Problem Behavior. We will begin this module by taking a look at a quote. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. And if a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, we punish. Why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as we do the others? This is sometimes a problem in our educational setting. We assume that children are coming to school and they are aware of their behaviors and they understand how to act and react to their emotions. However, many of us falsely assume that children can self-regulate their emotions and their behaviors, when in reality, they do not yet have that ability. It's estimated that 2% to 5% of students meet the definition of a behavior problem student. So, we must expect that at least one problem behavior student will be in a class. Research also suggests that most students exhibiting chronic behavior problems suffer from skill deficits, such as learning disabilities, attention problems, social communication disabilities, etc. So we need to start looking at these behaviors as a skill deficit. Let's take a look at this iceberg. Let's think about behavior the way we think about an iceberg. As with an iceberg, below the surface there's a much larger piece that is concealed from view that we do not get to see. However, this underlying piece of the iceberg is very significant. Much like behaviors, a lot of the behaviors that we see are outward behaviors. Outward behaviors like kicking, we see hitting, we see crying, biting, screaming, tantrums. A lot of these are observable behaviors that we can see. These are also known as externalizing behaviors. However, we need to understand that hidden under these behaviors, or in the case like an iceberg, there is a lot of valuable information that can help you to understand why a child might be kicking or screaming or tantruming. This understanding a why of the behavior will give you rich clues about the causes of the behavior and the triggers of the behavior. Far too often, we are so focused on that visible behavior that sometimes we don't take a look under the iceberg. We don't take time to look under the surface and look at these larger pieces and gather that valuable information to understand the why of a child's behavior. We talked a little bit on the last slide about skill deficits. Some of the skill deficits that might be the reason for these outward behaviors are things like communication difficulties, difficulty with self-regulation, difficulty with organization, motor difficulties, lack of independent leisure skills, social delays, academic delays, sensory differences. These are all considered skill deficits, and they are the function of the behavior. We're going to look at the function of behavior, and we're going to sort it into 4 functions of behavior. They can easily be remembered as thinking about everybody eats. Everybody has to eat. These categories for the function of behavior are escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. We're now going to take some time to look through each of these categories and each of these functions of behavior. We need to understand the why. Why are students possibly acting out? We'll start in the first column under E for escape. These behaviors removed undesired situation or person. So they occur at a time when something is viewed as being too hard, too boring, too loud. How could we respond? We need to teach the children how to request a break when needed. You might have to divide their tasks into smaller parts or give them activity choices within the task. For example, if a child flops out of their chair during a work session, you might want to provide them with access to a break card. A lot of escape functions we give into these behaviors, and the students are allowed then to leave the room because things get too hard and they disrupt the classroom, and they are immediately sent to the hall or out of the room. This is actually, the student is being reinforced, and they are learning that if they are to act up, they do not have to do the hard things that are asked of them. So we need to properly help to teach the children how to request and communicate their needs, understand their feelings when they feel that they need to escape, in order to help children maintain with the class and stay with the class. The next function we're going to look into is attention. So the function of this behavior gives us a reaction from others. These behaviors are often described as acting out behaviors. So when we see students with attention-seeking behaviors, they occur when a child wants to desire that social interaction with another person. They want to be the class clown. They want to get some feedback from an adult in the room or another teacher. They need that social interaction. So how do we respond to when the students are acting out and trying to seek attention from peers or other adults in the room? We need to teach the child to request how to receive positive attention through engaging in behaviors that we want to see. So we do not want to respond to behaviors when children are seeking attention in a negative way by yelling, screaming, or things like that. We need to respond when they are asking for attention in a positive way, in a quiet way, or through a desirable behavior. Then we provide that engagement with them and this positive attention, and I like it how you're doing this and that. So an example of if a child screams to get the attention, provide them with access to praise for having a quiet voice. So rather than yelling back at them, telling them to please be quiet, when they are asking for your attention in a quiet voice, that is when you really heavy praise. Thank you so much for asking for my attention in a quiet voice, or using a nice voice to get my attention. We need to teach them how to gain our attention in a positive way. Another function is tangible. So these behaviors provide access to highly preferred items or activities. So these behaviors occur when at a time in which the child desires a specific item or a specific activity. So we need to teach the child to ask for or wait or exhibit a specific behavior prior to granting access to the item. For example, if a student begs to use the iPad, allow them access following the completion of a task. Okay, so we need to make sure that these highly preferred items, we are not giving students highly preferred items when they are out of control and screaming and tantruming. We need to put a demand on them, possibly sit in the chair when they are, listening and calming down, then possibly provide the reinforcement. Another function is sensory. These behaviors provide access to sensory stimulation, so it feels good to engage in the behavior. A lot of us tap our pencil or pick out our fingers, squeeze our thumbs, or play with pens or rubber bands. Many different are rings if you're wearing rings. These all provide sensory feedback, but sensory feedback looks a little different for different individuals. So they occur at any time in the presence or absence of another person. So we can teach students if they're if the sensory behaviors are harming them, we need to teach them a functional replacement behavior that can also give them that sort of the same sensory input, but possibly in a safer way. For example, if a child puts non-edible things in their mouth, we need to provide them with access to a chew tube or gum, things like that, because we do not want children putting non-edible things in their mouth, but they need that sensory. They need to be able to chew or have moving. Possibly another examples that I used to use are Velcro underneath the desk, so students can rub the Velcro if they're fidgety. This is when fidget toys, however, if you introduce fidget toys and things, other things like that, you need to teach the children when it's appropriate to use them, how to use them, and different parameters for that. The functions of behavior are important because these are those underlying things that we need to figure out. As to a lot of times we see those external behaviors, we see the tantruming, we see the hitting, the kicking, the biting, but we need to understand the why. If we can understand why the students are escaping, then we can understand how to replace those behaviors with interventions. Possibly, the academic levels are too high for the students, so we might need to chunk their assignments. A lot of these, if we can understand the function of behaviors, then we could understand the skill deficits and target skill deficits, okay, rather than continuing to punish for the same thing over and over again. We need to understand what skills are lacking so we could teach the students the skills to replace those negative interactions with positive interactions so they can be successful. So our job is to figure out what the student is getting out of this challenging behavior. What's the payoff for tantruming? What's the payoff for screaming or ripping up their paper and throwing it on the ground? We need to figure out why the student is engaging in the problem behavior. What is the function? And then we need to figure out what the student should be doing instead and teach them what they should do instead. We can also change the environment to make the student more successful. How can we set up the student's day to be successful? And finally, figure out how to teach the student what they need to know, and through self-reflection throughout the day. Speaking of environment, we need to figure out, if we look at this plant in our home, what would we do to make conditions better for this plant? We might water it more. We might move it to more sunlight, to access more sunlight. We might be watering it too much. So we need to try different things and change the environment to allow the plant to flourish. That's much like children. We need to figure out and try different things and change and adapt the environment to help the student have a more successful day. So you might be thinking, well, how are we going to do this? Well, here's what we're going to do. This is what the whole series module is about. We're going to try to shift to more proactive strategies. Okay, we're going to focus on the function of the behavior and not the problem behavior. I know it's very easy to constantly focus on the problem behavior because that's what we see, right? We see the child kicking, we see the child spitting, but we need to try to shift our mindset and think about the why, right? We need to focus on that function. Also, we need to understand that there are skill deficits. Our students have skill deficits in the areas of behavior, not only academics, but behavior. So these appropriate behaviors must be explicitly taught. And not only must be explicitly taught once, but they need to be taught more than once, and they need to be revisited, and rules need to be modeled. And also, if the students are appropriately behaving, then we need to reinforce them and keep highly reinforcing them until those behaviors become internalized. Think about what happens before the behavior occurs, okay? And then, like I said, we need to reinforce those appropriate behaviors. All right. So you cannot have an effect on behavior when it's not happening. Understand that when students are calm, that is when we have teachable moments. That's when we could teach students the appropriate behaviors. So we need to shift to these proactive approaches, and we need to react to the behavior when it's good behavior, rather than waiting for them to misbehave. So we're going to also, like I said, think about what happens before the behavior occurs. So when we think about before the behavior occurs, we're thinking about the antecedents, and we're not only thinking about the antecedents, but the setting events. So the setting events are examples of the student comes to school, they possibly are sick, they didn't get much sleep the night before. Setting events are often when we say to ourselves, I have no idea what set them off, okay? So you can't see what happens 5 hours before students get to school. So these setting events are harder to prevent because we can't change the way, a student's sleeping patterns, things like that. However, you can offer accommodations to the student's schedule and possibly lessen the work as if the student isn't feeling well. When we think about antecedents, these are the things that happen right before a behavior occurs. Okay, so for example, if there's a really loud noise in the environment, that might trigger a behavior. Okay, if a student is asked to work, that might trigger a behavior. If the teacher attended to another student and this student is an attention-seeking student, that might trigger a behavior. So we might also be able to prevent these things from happening if we pay attention to these antecedents and understand what's happening right before the behaviors occur, so that we can make small changes in the environment to help prevent these challenging behaviors in the future. So looking at that environment, right? Thinking about that plant. How could we make things better in the environment for the student so they can be successful?